Okay, kia ora koutou. Uh, my name is Tatane Koia, and I come from the East Coast up in the North Island, north of Gisborne. I was before actually coming to Christchurch, I lived up in the high mountain ranges up west of a place called, on the coast called Tolaga Bay. But I lived high up in the mountains. I was a farm boy. And my dad was a shepherd, fencer, and, all round hand, on the farm. That was my life. And we learned a lot of skills when we were growing up. So by the time when we were like 15 or 16, we had more skills than most, I think, kids who lived in the city, as in survival, as in, all that kind of country stuff that you grew up with. But yeah, so I lived and worked there for a good while after I'd left school, a good 15 years. And it was only like 1984, I left home for the very first time, and I ended up in Christchurch. Of all places, it was Christchurch. And I didn't go there initially. I was in Wellington for a while. I didn't really like it there. And a lot of my family had already moved to Christchurch and had lived there for a number of years. And they had already had their tamariki had come along. And I thought, oh, well, I've got whānau down there and I'll go there and see what that's like. So I got there and I didn't like the city too much. So I ended back out in the country, working around, grubbing tussock, working on farms and stuff like that, until it was only later on I met my lady who was going to be the mother of my children. Her name is Desna Mills. And and at that time I moved back to the city. And then this was about, the middle 80s, 86, 87. And then I met up with a group of her friends, the Luafutus and Vic. I met them, started to meet them and get to know them. So they were always there. And we always had that, I found there was a big connection there for some reason. I didn't know at the time. And then I met up with another group of people who were into music, and they had a band going. And so I kicked around with them for a few years. I actually became their roadie, and travelled around with them. And I love their music. It was really homegrown Christchurch music. It was reggae and a bit of bluesy stuff that they were playing at the time. And they called their band name was called Horizon. And yeah, and that was sort of I started to really, really get into what they were doing. I didn't think for once that I would actually be up on stage with them at one stage. And it was only about 3 or 4 years later, I started out as their roadie, and then I got a part-time job at the summertimes gigs down Hagley Park, as a roadie. And then I started to learn all the technical stuff, on stage sound and all of that, I got really, really interested in it, really, really, and not in the music side, but the technical side. Really, I was really drawn to it. So, yeah, and that's sort of how the music thing started to happen. I used to take part. I used to be called out to do the orientation gigs for the universities and help out with all the sound stage and all that. So I've got a lot of experience doing that kind of work and rubbing shoulders with all the big bands, at the time, like Herbs, and yeah, and they were a great influence on me, especially their roadie. His name was Sparrow, and he was a little guy. And he'd come up to me, oh, yeah, he said, thanks for the hand, thanks for the help, bro. I said, oh, no worries, bro. I love doing this. And he looked at me and he said, one day you're going to be on stage. You're not going to be doing this. And I laughed and I was, yeah, right. And then later on down the line, the lead singer had left, and and his name was Tia Moa. and he's the father of Anika Moa. That's his dad. That's her father. And he was a great guitar player and awesome singing voice, but he moved to Auckland. And so the band was out without their lead singer because he sang lead for the band for Horizon. And so, yeah, they were looking for a lead singer. And one of the guys, I think was one of the guys looked at me and he says, "Oh, you." I said, "What do you mean, me?" I said, "You sing." I said, "Oh, I can't sing." He said, "You know our sound, you know the music, you know it all." Yeah, and I did. I learned all the words off by heart. I knew the music. And they just said, "Well, just sing this." And I said, "All right." And that's how it started. I started singing and got together with them at practices. And it wasn't long before I knew everything. I knew the whole program. And they had about an hour slot, enough songs to fill an hour at the time. And that's when it first started. And so that hikoi into the music world lasted a good 5 years. And after a while, we were approached by George Kahi at the time. And he was running a program called Puawai. And this was down at the corner of, I forget, down Worcester, and I forget where it was, but it was a place where musicians could go, local musicians, young people, whatever. And he wanted us to be a part of it. And so we did. Yeah. So no, that'd be great. That'd be great to be in there, to be in that environment with other musicians. And, who knows what could come out of that. And for us, it was a good thing, as a group. Um, and he wanted us to be there because we weren't used or anything, but we had something perhaps for them to aspire to, and just to be around them and take part in the programs. So we did that. And later on down the line, the band name we changed the name from Horizon and started calling ourselves Ahika. And from that moment on, when we changed our name to Ahika, we sort of became another entity. No, and then we started touring all over the South Island, taking part in all the orientation gigs, and it was really fun. And then later on, as time went on, we started, we'd been together for a long time, and we thought, well, it was time to disband and explore other avenues wherever, individually, where it may take us. So after that, what did we do? We moved out into the country and back out into the country and lived out there for a while because we had young children and me specifically wanted them to have a life that I lived as a country boy, and to be in that environment. I thought it'd be a really good thing because I had all the skills and got really pally with the neighbors next door, and we were kind of living a life off the grid kind of thing. And then it was only later on, about 3 to 4 years later on, we moved back into the city. And then we reconnected with Vic and Losta. Oh, my partner did, and she was studying to become a social services worker. She was working towards that, and I started to think about my Māoritanga, because I'd left it so far behind in my childhood that I needed to reconnect for some reason, if not for my children. So I did that, and I enrolled in Waitanga, Te Kohanga Reo, which was happening at the time. I think down Armour Street it was. I think it was. Yeah, and I was there for a couple of years, and it was really an eye opener for me because I rarely spoke the language anymore. But all that I learned from my parents was still inside, but I never used it. And so when I started reconnecting with myself in that way and learning, and relearning tikanga and whai korero and whatever came after, during, I started to realize, hey, this is really important what I'm doing. If not for me, it's for my children, and it's for us as a people, and it's for my whānau too, as well, because none of the brothers had taken that step to actually reconnect with themselves in that way. So I and then one day I was at home, and my son and my daughter came up to me with a couple of pieces of paper and said, "Dad," I said, "Yeah, can you draw me Raphael?" I said, "Who's Raphael?" She said, "The Ninja Turtle, Dad." "Can you draw it for me?" And I'm going, "What?" And my son comes up, "Dad, can you draw the dog?" I said, "What dog?" "The dog in Foot Rot Flats, Dad. Can you draw me the dog?" And it was like, serious, I haven't touched pen to paper like that for years. And I do remember back as a young kid, growing up, I was quite the artist. And then, but I left that all behind. By the time I went to high school, I wasn't interested in it. But anyway, fast forward back to what I was saying, was that when they approached me with that, I was scratching my head and I go, I don't know if I can do this. Looked at theirs and I was shaking my hand. I don't know. She said, go on, try. And so I did, and I was quite amazed with the results after a week of struggling, to draw like that. And it was like, I was pretty impressed. Oh, that's cool. Maybe, it's still there. Maybe I've got something. There's something about that drawing. And it was the children that kind of ignited that again. And so, yeah, I started mucking around a bit and drawing, and then it got to the point where my Māori tanga, that wairua inside me, was saying, hey, there's more to this than you think. It's really, and it got me thinking about our own art. And like, I didn't know, I was really ignorant of it. I knew what a koru was and all that stuff, yeah, but I didn't have the knowledge. At that time, I didn't know the difference between a pakiti and a hi, all of that stuff. I had no clue of what I was doing. But I just persevered and persevered. And so I ended up with a collection of little doodles, on an A4 paper, and just every now and then I'd go back to it. But I was never really happy with what I had done. I wasn't at the level where I wanted to be, and I wanted to be there, not tomorrow, but now. There was that sense of urgency that made me just keep on going, keep on going. And even if I didn't like the drawing, I thought, oh, no, then maybe the next one, it's going to be the breakthrough. Because I wasn't confident with the patterns I was drawing. I didn't like doing them. So I ended up just doing block colors. And what inspired me with that was Wakahuia. I used to watch them on Matatini, and they'd come out with all these designs, bold and black, and they looked really effective. And I thought, I like that. That's what I'm going to do. That's the kind of drawings I'm going to do to help me to learn, because I just I wasn't there. I didn't have any tutelage. There was no one to show me except for books, and that I'd go to the library and read and look at the pictures. And I started to collect my own stuff, I started getting photocopies and stuff like that and just looking at it. So by the time I got to, even my partner, we got to YCD, I had this sort of, I was in limbo kind of thing, you know, not too sure and not that really confident art wise. And I didn't really know why I was drawn to the YCD, except for the fact that of my association and the friendship that I built up with Vic and Lossa. So, and the YCD was happening, before I joined. I think it was about a couple of years before I joined, before I became a youth worker. But it wasn't just the process of that was really interesting, because I I'd approached the law. I said, I really like what's happening here. I walked into the YCD at the time. I said, oh, it's huge. That's massive. And there was something that I wanted to be a part of at the time, and I wasn't too sure why. What was it? The kids that I wanted to be around, or was it? It was just drawn to it. And yes, and so I approached Losa and said, "Look, I'd really like to do some volunteer work here, or some volunteer work with Vic." And so she hooked me up with Vic in the beginning to do street patrol, because he had the caravan there still, the famous caravan that was in the square. And yeah, so I approached him about it, and I was oh, did Losta say anything? She said, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I really like to come out with you a couple, whenever you are going out on street patrol. I'd really like to be a part of that. And so, no worries. So that's what I did for the first, couple of months or so, and just talking with Vic, being with Vic, and actually learning off Vic. And the magnetism he had out there with all the rangatahi out there. I was really blown away by that. I thought, wow, yeah. And it was really a troubled time there. That was in the 90s, 90, oh gosh. Because yeah, 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 93. And because the white power were raising their heckles, they had all the young prospects were all out on the street in the square, and I knew then there's going to be trouble, man. This is not good. And it did escalate, it really did. The times I've been out on street patrol, I saw things that, not that I knew it didn't happen, but when you see it, it just reminded me of them being beaten up by the cops, and you're standing there as a youth worker and you can't do anything about it. You cannot touch the cops, pull them away, get them off that poor guy, that 13-year-old. They're all smothering. And I looked at Victor after that, and he looked at me and said, we're going to debrief. We need to talk about what I said. So I said, I know this, Vic. I know what they're like. But when you see it like that and you feel helpless, because you want to stop it. But if you lay a hand on that cop, you're going down with that boy. And he said, yeah, that's it. So we're here to prevent that before it even gets there to that stage. That's what we're here for. So if we can avoid that with these kids and get them home safe on that last bus, we've done our job for the night. Everyone gets to go home. No one ends up in the back of the paddy wagon. And that was the focus of him and his support who were out there with him to keep that from happening, because that was happening a lot to our youth, And you'd go across to Cashel Street where all the bogans hung out, all the white boys. Yeah, I hate using colour, but where they hang out, the police never touched them. We'd walk down Castle Street and they're playing silly buggers down there. There's no cop around. And I think that's black and white difference there, Vic. These cops are targeting our kids. And it's not right. I know they're rat bags, they're rat bags, but to be targeted like that and to actually drive around the square on purpose to antagonize them, because that's what they were doing. I used to say, they're just antagonizing them, Vic. They're making things worse. And he said, exactly. And he said, at that time, they had a special unit just for that. And Vic used to call them the shit kickers, because that's exactly what they did. They'd run off, all jump out of their van and target one kid, pull him out of the crowd and shove him into the van and drive him away. That's how it was. And so it wasn't just the racist problem from the skinheads who were building up in their numbers, but it was also from the police. It was a very we were like, as youth workers, and as I came to know, we were stuck in a rock and a hard place when it came to our youth. And yeah. And so I kept doing that volunteer work for a while. Then I said to Los, oh, I think I'd like to come to the YCD and do some volunteer work here. And she said, well, there's not much you can do except. I said, well, I can sweep up. I'll get a broom and I'll just clean up and whatever. I'll just come in for a couple of hours and just do that. And she said, are you for real? I said, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I didn't tell her why. But she had, okay. But why I said that? Because I wanted to observe everything. I wanted to be like incognito and see what was going on. So I can look around, oh, who's that one? Who's that one there? Who's that one coming in? And to slowly get to know the kids. I didn't say much. The kids would come in, just look at me and they go, who's that one? And not say nothing, and just keep sweeping. And I look around and meet the staff and after a while, after a couple, 3 or 4 weeks of that, and I said to Lorsa, oh, I'd like to apply for a job. And she said, really? I said, yeah, I'd really like to apply for it, if there's a vacancy. And so, well, we'll set it up with the rest of the staff. You come in like in the morning and we'll talk about it. We'll have a bit of an interview. And so the interview went fine. And I got the position as a youth worker to be on the floor. And that's how my journey with YCD really started. Yeah. So,